In the US, in the next 12 months, the best estimates are that 27 million adults will have at least one panic attack.
In the UK, 1 in 5 people will develop some form of disordered anxiety.
There is certainly a physical component to anxiety and panic and all of those things. Primarily, we care about the cognitive part of this, the interpretation, how you interact with it, what you think about it.
If other people feel like me, why do we end up experiencing anxiety like this?
Run or fight or freeze or whatever you need to do to stay alive. Well, I know you want me to do those things, but I can't, I'm not going to do those things.
It's the misinterpretation of a misfiring threat response, and that misinterpretation is cognitive.
Welcome to the Disordered Podcast. This is episode number 8, entitled Anxiety, Mind versus Body. I'm Drew Linsalata, graduate student in clinical mental health counseling and therapist in training in the US. And I want to remind you that in the US, in the next 12 months, the best estimates are that 27 million adults will have at least one panic attack, but only 2% of them will develop panic disorder.
And I'm Joshua Fletcher, also known as Anxiety Josh. I'm a psychotherapist who specializes in anxiety disorders in the UK. Did you know that in the UK, 1 in 5 people, I don't know if it applies to the US as well,
Probably
but 1 in 5 people will develop some form of disordered anxiety
in their lifetime, right?
in their lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also like how you included dot, dot, dot. Like the dot, dot, dot could have just been a pause.
It
Uh,
could
uh,
have,
but
but
fair enough to you. You don't get any. There's no half measures with Drew. If he's going to do something, he's going to do it properly.
no, I like to speak my ellipses if possible. So yeah, they're people too.
That's his dating profile. I like to speak my ellipses.
Swipe right if you also like to speak ellipses. So anyway, welcome to this week's episode. Today, really, what we're going to talk about is the fact that there is certainly a physical component to anxiety and panic and all of those things. You really do feel it. It is happening in your body. But that primarily we care about the cognitive part of this, the interpretation, how you interact with it, what you think about it, what you say
Mm.
about it to anybody that will listen and to yourself. So, what do you think, Josh?
I think it's a really good subject to explore, particularly with the stats. The question is, why do I feel this way? And if other people feel like me, why do we end up experiencing anxiety like this? Why is it disordered? Why are we the people waking up first thing in the morning with a sense of doom? Why are we the people with these intrusive thoughts? Why are we the people that are constantly having repetitive, scary symptoms over and over again? And yet, 4 out of 5 people don't have that. Or if they do, why does it not become a thing? Everyone has a panic attack in their lifetime. Everyone I know has probably had one,
Mm,
but they don't necessarily develop, an anxiety disorder.
yeah.
Um, and maybe we can look at that today. Mind versus body. Is anxiety a problem in the body, or is it a cognitive problem? And Drew and I, well, often discuss using our expertise that it's often a cognitive problem as opposed to it being physically scary. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It is certainly physically scary. And like I said to start the episode, sometimes people will say when they hear me talk or they read what I write, they'll say, "Oh, you're missing all the whole, what about gut health and what about regulating your nervous system and all those sort of things?" And we'll talk about that stuff down the road in other episodes. But yeah, that's all things. Your body feels things, 100% true. So when you are in
Mhm.
an anxious state, you are feeling things in your body. That is never denying that. But the disordered part tends to come from how you interpret that and how you interact with that and what you think about that. So if you look at the stat that we opened the episode with, if 27 million adult Americans in the US are going to have a panic attack in the next 12 months, reasonable estimate, and only 2% of those will go on to develop panic disorder, then what's the difference between, you know, 27 million people with the same physical experience? And we talked about
Mm.
that in a couple of episodes ago, what panic does in the body. 27 million people with the same physical experience, but only 2% of them will interpret it in such a way that they become afraid of it and start to become
Mm.
focused on it and latched onto it. I
Mm.
think that says something about the nature of the disordered state.
Yeah, definitely. I think the one word that unites all people with disordered anxiety, people who really struggle with it, is the word misinterpretation. So it's like when I I am misinterpreting this, and I don't mean that as a kind of a surface level error, like, "Oh, you're reading it all wrong." Technically, you are, but as someone who's been through it and looking back, yeah, it was a misinterpretation because of a really frightening experience. So I would misinterpret hundreds of times. Oh, why is my heart palpitating like this? Is that the sign of a heart attack? I would misinterpret an intrusive thought about harming a loved one as fact or a premonition because I'm misinterpreting my threat response.
Mhm.
I would misinterpret derealization or feeling detached and suddenly quite lightheaded as, the first sign of going insane. But I'd keep misinterpreting it over and over again. I'd as and mistaking it for intuition or a message that needs my attention, and I think that's what unites everyone with an anxiety disorder. If you've got panic disorder, it's like, oh my god, panic attacks are dangerous.
Yeah.
I need to give them my attention, and it needs to be constantly there. If you've got social anxiety, it's I need to ruminate and plan ahead and act around interactions. If you've got generalized anxiety, is I just need to give all these what ifs my attention and act on them just in case that those bad catastrophes do happen.
Mm.
If you've got any of these, driving anxiety, oh, I need to stay in the slow lane on the highway just in case I crash, or avoid it altogether.
Mm.
It's the misinterpretation of a misfiring threat response, and that misinterpretation is cognitive.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. One interesting, and I just tried to Google it. I can't find the study off the top of my head, but if I do, I'll put it in the show notes for this episode. There was an interesting paper that was published, I think, not too long ago, where they had a bunch of people who literally threw their crazy thoughts or their wild thoughts, their intrusive thoughts into a hopper, and only a few of them were officially diagnosed with OCD. The other people had literally no complaint and no history of OCD, but everybody had the same thoughts. And when they
Mhm.
were coded by clinicians, experienced clinicians, the clinicians could not tell who had OCD and who did not.
Nope.
Fascinating, right?
No,
So,
it's fast. It's just what the brain decides to.
yeah.
Um, Also, really, this is super tricky. By the way,
Oh,
we're
yeah.
not. We're talking about this it's a really sticky place to be in. And I'm talking to someone who suffered for years, and Drew suffered for years. We're just talking about it from a place of looking back at what we've come through, being in a good place. That's what the problem was. It's not oh, that's the problem, get on with it and come over here. No, everyone's got their own kind of journey to go through, and everyone's got their own kind of hurdles to overcome. But actually looking back, and when I look at what the similarities between my own recovery and the clients and all the people that Drew works with and speaks to, it's that trusting that this is a false alarm,
Mhm.
and my thinking brain is only going to suggest nonsense to me. And it's going to suggest it through visuals, through audios, through mind movies. And Drew and I were discussing before the episode. Actually, it was a large kind of proportion of people who develop anxiety disorders are creatives.
Mm.
Musicians, artists, or anyone who can write, read,
Yeah.
anyone who's really good with their imagination. They often do get stuck there because their cognitive brain will misinterpret, the sign of a headache, and
Yeah.
they'll play through the whole movie of being in the hospital and, "Oh, no, there's nothing we could have done," or,
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Whereas some people like my mate Callum, who's really chilled out, he'll just be like, "Well, stupid thought, innit?"
Yeah.
You
Isn't it
know?
amazing? And you're right, that creativity or that propensity is an amazing thing. It's a wonderful thing. And then an anxiety disorder can turn that into a weapon really quick. Like, oh,
Mm.
let's see how creative we can get about doom, about what's going on here.
Yeah, and this is
Yeah.
why you ever get the people with derealization and existential thoughts or existential OCD?
Mm.
Or give someone creative mind derealization, a sense of dissociation, and then think about life and existence.
Oh
they,
boy.
they go down they,
Yeah.
they go down a rabbit hole that ultimately ends up back here again. So
Yeah.
by all means, go down the rabbit hole. But
I've been that
it's
person.
gonna
I've
yeah.
gone down that rabbit hole, and yeah, a creative mind can get really, really creative and really loud and really sticky. So I think what Josh said bears repeating, I think, just knowing that it's the interpretation is great. That's kind of psychoeducation and that helps you get started, but that doesn't fix anything. Just to be clear about that. Like,
Mm.
oh, it's just an interpretation, no problem. I'm all fixed. Nah, I wish it worked that way. We would have no podcast to do. But it doesn't work that way. That
No.
realization informs your recovery, but it's still really hard work to get through all this.
What I like about our last episode, it follows on nicely about self-talk, is that I would actually use that psychoeducation talking to me when I was going through recovery, which is, hold on, this is a physical symptom of anxiety in my body. Now my cognitive brain is misinterpreting that. And just in case, I mean, how many anxious people say just in case?
Oh yeah.
Go, yeah. Just in case my threat response has released adrenaline and cortisol, just in case that there is a threat to this misinterpretation. And part of recovery was saying out loud, no, I'm just misinterpreting this. Yeah, my threat response is doing its own thing. I'm not broken. It's just happening when I don't want it to.
Yeah.
What I do next is super important.
Yeah, and that's the hard part of that because it is happening in your body, and there is, the title of the episode, "Body versus Mind" or "Mind versus Body." Like, yeah, you are feeling all those things. So what makes it so really difficult is that those are signals from your brain, your interpretation to say run or fight or freeze or whatever you need to do to stay alive. And your job is to say, well, I know you want me to do those things, and you're giving me all kinds of physical cues to do those things, but I can't. I'm not going to do those things. That's
Mm,
what makes this really difficult.
mm.
So, yeah, yeah.
Did you
Just
ever have the kind of anxiety where you couldn't really notice it physically, but you did just feel scared? I used to get that quite a lot, where
yeah,
like actually my heart rate was fine. Maybe I felt a bit derealized. I don't know, but it scared me more that kind of anxiety because I was a bit like, well, I'm not running around panicking or anything like that, and I'm not having any of the physical body stuff. It all originates in the body because it's all hormonal, chemical, whatever.
right.
But I used to have that anxiety. I think it was part of GAD. I had nothing else to worry about, so I was just worrying about the state of not feeling 100%, and then
Could be.
that creates like a simmer of anxiety. A lot of GAD is like this. Inwards GAD is like I
Yeah,
just worried about why I'm worrying a bit,
yeah,
and I can't focus outside of it. But that's the kind of worry in my experience, and when I've heard other clients, is that actually they can't feel their heart rate going. They're not struggling to catch their breath. They don't feel it's just it just feels like something's wrong, and they can often misinterpret that as a sign of, well, maybe that is
yeah.
a message from the future to tell you something bad's going to happen. And obviously,
I
no.
would experience that as I began to get better, and my body was getting the message, but my brain kind of wasn't yet because it's the slowest, stupidest part.
I could have told you that, Joe.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Confirming that my brain is stupid. My partner, ladies and gentlemen. So, but I would get it, and I remember feeling that where I just had that feeling of fear and uneasiness, and fear is the best word I could put. I was just afraid. I was upset. I don't know what I was, but I didn't have all the short of breath, knee knocking, dizzy stuff. And it would happen sometimes in the middle of the night. So I didn't really have a lot of nocturnal panic attacks. But there were times when I would wake up in the middle of the night, whatever, got to use the bathroom or just wake up and suddenly be really focused on the fact that I feel terrible, but I don't feel physically anything. And that was very alarming until I learned, like, oh, this is just another state to be in. So again, the interpretation of that,
Yeah.
yeah, though this isn't right. Something's not right. You
Yeah, I
know,
was the same. I used to get like late morning though.
yeah, really weird, right? Like
Yeah.
just this feeling like I feel terrible and I
Yeah.
don't know why, but I don't, this isn't panic, I think. Yeah, it was hard.
But even then, now acknowledging now that we don't do that now, it's like that isn't interesting anymore
Yeah.
because we're not going to get any messages from it. We're not going to get any answers. Just like, oh, I don't feel 100%. Well, that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Whatever,
Or
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
important if we're talking about interpretation and cognition and not being so focused on the body part of it, because that's not really, an hour orientation, not really the way out. But I think it's important to recognize that in a recovered state, if I start to feel that, I feel really terrible. Sometimes I can tell, like, oh, well, you know, I know what I was reading about before I went to bed, or I had a really heavy discussion with whatever, somebody important to me, or there's something going on in business or whatever. Like I can almost identify, like, yeah, well, I'm just feeling some stuff right now, as
Mm.
opposed to like, oh, what is this? Why do I feel this way? The state itself is not the problem anymore.
Yeah, I think the word "why" is very important as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you start
Yeah.
asking why,
And if I
you know
can't tell why, it's okay. Sometimes I can tell why in a recovered
Yeah,
state. But if I can't in a recovered state, it's like, well, I don't know why right now. Oh well. What can I do?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know now's not the time to answer the why,
correct.
now's the time to allow the threat response to pass,
Yeah.
which is, really interesting. I was gonna save this question for the end, but, I
Bring it.
think I'm gonna ask it now. One of our listeners, um, has asked, and they've been in therapy. They said, "I've been in therapy and this and that, and kind of conventional talking therapy." And they said, I'm often reminded, whether it's in the wellness sphere or sometimes my therapist and stuff. And I'm not bashing this therapist, but if you don't have an understanding of anxiety disorders, you kind of your good intentions can often have an opposite effect. So is checking in on myself a healthy thing? Now, it's something that I hear quite a lot, and it's something I heard a lot in my training. Check in with yourself,
Mhm.
check in. But actually, if you're someone who struggles with an anxiety disorder, why might that not be a good thing, Drew?
Oh, yeah. I've been in some heated, I will call them spirited debates with people with therapists that I respect and they're
Drew's throwing chairs and
literally Jerry
calling
Springer.
out.
Oh, not good. But because I have called that advice out for a person in a non-distorted state, the idea that you can stop, take a second, check in with yourself. What do you need right now? Is not terrible advice. And as
No.
a recovered person, I sometimes can use that now, and it's really helpful. But
Mm.
in a disordered state where the state itself becomes the source of alarm, telling somebody to dig inside to figure out what the state means and what it's trying to tell them is a recipe for disaster. You
Oh
may as
my
well
god,
hand
yeah.
the person in a burning building, just hand them a can of gasoline and a mask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause I called it I call it, looking for the miracle thought,
Mm.
because
Ooh.
yeah, it was something that's like, if I my habit has been to ruminate, there's something happening in my body, so I'm gonna use my mind to help me work out
Mm.
what's happening in my body. And thanks to things like, like movies and dramatizations of therapy and stuff, my brain's just drawing upon what it thinks, is going to be the most helpful at the time to help me get through this. So I would sit and I would look for the miracle thought in my brain. But well, maybe if I find out the root cause or the reason or whatever. And I'd do this for months, years sometimes, just going round and round in circles. Why do I feel this way? What's going on? That question, why? When actually, if someone would have just said, listen, you got super stressed, and usually around this age, if you're going to get an anxiety disorder, you will, because sometimes your sensitization just goes overboard, it catches you off guard, and it conflicts with your want to have control. And you're going to misinterpret what is an adrenaline rush, an adrenaline flood. If someone was there to say, it's okay, you can just leave that alone. It's going to do some mad stuff to your body. It's okay to leave it alone. That permission to leave it alone would have saved me a lot of years of my life, but I
Yeah.
don't regret it because I sold over 100,000 books. No, no, but I don't regret it.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I don't regret it because actually it, bec- both of us became impassioned to share and teach others, because it would have just saved us a lot of time.
Yeah, and I think that there's that realization that like, okay, well, guys, you're saying that I shouldn't be focused on my body, even though I feel it on my body, but it's a cognitive problem, but I'm not supposed to dig into my feelings either. Well, like, well, kind of, which I know sounds like terrible advice when you look at general mental health advice, or I'll go there, into insta therapy, right? So Root always talks about insta therapy, which I love, and like,
Mm,
wellness people, wellness advocates and gurus and healing coaches and all those people, and then the other and the analog to that question is to trust your gut. You got to go with your gut, your intuition, girl. Just
No,
follow your intuition.
no,
No,
absolutely. You're
the worst thing for an anxious person or a disordered person to do is to trust their gut. Your gut is dragging you up and down the block all day long against your will. Why do you keep trusting it? I don't understand.
particularly with OCD as well, because
Yeah,
it literally can often make people feel guilty.
yeah,
So, what is your gut? What is your intuition? Is it fear, depression with a side order of guilt?
yeah.
No, that's just different things clashing here. A lot of it is about leaving it alone. Now, saying that in the past, people misinterpret even that. So, what? So you're saying we don't go to therapy and talk about
Right,
stuff and
right,
feelings?
right. Yeah.
Absolutely not. There is always space in therapy to talk about stuff. We're
Mhm.
talking about in the immediacy
Yeah.
because people suddenly. How many people have? How many times did you try this? I try. I would like. I like meditation. I like mindfulness and stuff,
Mhm.
but I'd only leave it till I was like triggered,
Yeah.
and then get really annoyed that it wasn't
Wasn't
working.
working. Oh, I'm talking about this today in my live stream.
Yeah, yeah, it's not working, or I've tried the box breathing and the belly breathing because it was done in the immediacy of the anxiety. It wasn't done as a lifestyle change
Yeah.
because I didn't like what was happening in my body. And again, my mind was like, well, let's try and fix it.
Yeah.
But there's nothing to fix.
Yeah, there's nothing that makes it really difficult. So, okay, so you don't have to fix your body. It's just doing what it's supposed to do. And but you don't I think when you say immediacy, I would use the word urgency also. People who are struggling, we all struggle with feelings and emotion and pain and
Mm,
conflict. We all do. And what Josh is saying is 100% correct. There's a place for talking about that. You have to.
mm,
But usually, when we're working on that stuff, it may be a painful process or a difficult process, but it's generally not an urgent process. If you feel an urgency to find meaning in your emotion or your thought right away, that's a clue. Like when it's urgent or feels
mm,
imperative or like it's a safety issue, then that's a pretty good clue that like, oh wait, I'm stuck on finding meaning in my thoughts, and that's part
yeah.
of the cognitive interpretation. Anxious people, all people think things and feel things. People who are stuck in an anxious state, a disordered state, tend to immediately need to make meaning out of all of those things.
Yes.
It's in recovery, well, I don't. Sometimes I want to make meaning, but not always. I don't need to. It's not urgent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also remember, I'm misinterpreting the urgency itself, which
Right.
is part of my threat response.
Yeah.
You know, it's usually when you press the button, is
Oh, yeah. You're right. I could have played. Hang on. Ready?
amygdala.
There you go.
There we go. And
And he's gonna come after me now because I blew that. Right?
it's yeah, the
He's
critic.
coming at me right now
You
because
blew it.
I blew the soundboard. Yeah.
yeah. There you blew the sound. You had one job, Drew.
One
Uh,
job.
yeah.
Shame.
No, but it's like you miss if you're feeling a sense of urgency to feel better, you and you are acting on that urgency in the immediacy of feeling anxious, you're thanking the threat response as well.
Mhm.
This is why, and Drew wrote a book called 7% Slower. It's part of that. It kind of addresses that urgency
Yeah.
because you don't need to be frantic about things and remember that.
Yeah, that's a word I should have used more in that book because that is in the end what it came down to. It's okay to be fast. Some people are just fast, or you might work in a job where you need to be fast, but you don't have to be frantic or desperate. Is
No,
the other
because
word.
it actually thanks the threat response. It's
Yeah,
still sending a message here saying, I need to be urgent about this, so therefore this is important.
yeah,
And but yeah, I mean, I find that uh, like really interesting. Just a note as well, like a question that I get quite a lot is that people who have chronic conditions.
hmm,
So if you have diabetes or Crohn's or Addison's or anything that requires you to actually check in on your body,
mhm,
um, or the anxiety can be a sign of like hypoglycemia or something like that,
sure.
or low cortisol levels, or whatever the condition is you have. That's okay. Of course you are. Like some people who have a high blood sugar might have symptom or a thyroid issue
Hmm.
that actually can mimic the symptoms of anxiety. So that's okay to check in.
Right.
We're not saying you have hypothyroidism and diabetes and all these things, but just to answer that question is that yeah, of course, use common sense. If you live with those conditions and you're anxious, it is okay to have a quick check in to be like, right, okay, is this actually physical? You
Mhm.
know, is this an actual interpretation or is it not? And I found that with clients, people in that situation, you get pretty good at distinguishing between them both over time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You do get, maybe in the beginning you're not so good at it, but over time you do learn. And
Mm,
it's interesting because at one point, believe it or not, it was Dave Carbonell who said to me, like, well, not only is it okay, it's almost required. Like you have to take care of yourself. And I thought, oh, that's a great statement.
mm,
So if you have diabetes or you have a thyroid problem, you're on meds, or people like POTS is a big one, right?
mm,
Is a big one in this community. Like, yeah, you do have to do things to actually take care of your body and manage your health. That's okay. It's not only okay,
mm,
it's required. But
mm,
it might be a little bit fuzzy and you don't know the difference between it and the anxiety. But if you kind of disengage from that urgency that we're talking about, then over time you get to learn the difference. Oh, that's right. I know what this is versus is this anxiety or am I having a blood sugar crash? You start to understand the difference. You really do.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Remember, it's about our interpretation. It's what makes it different between from the 4 out of 5 people that can't really relate to you and the 1 in 5 that can relate to you completely.
Yeah.
And we speak as one of those 1 in 5 people, but come out, the other side,
Right.
um, in a lot better place. Um, so why do people then do like, so let's say take panic attacks, for example, or usually I hear, you have a nervous breakdown and then
Mm.
it happens. Why do people, the 2% of people who have panic attacks, why does it become a problem? So, because a lot of people, and I used to initially think, why do I keep having loads of panic attacks and other people don't? Maybe there's something wrong with me.
Right.
Actually, looking back, I was fine. There was just things that I was doing.
Yeah.
Why do you think, Drew, that happens? Why does it stick for some and not for
You
others?
know what, man? That is literally the $1 billion with a B, the $1 billion question. I wish I had a definitive answer for that. And there's a
Mm,
lot of speculation about it. And maybe one day we'll know a little more about it. So there's a lot of research that talks about maybe some people are genetically predisposed to that sort of thinking pattern and those sort of habits, or you may have been taught. We've had this discussion before. Maybe you grew up in an environment where you were told the world was dangerous. You have to be careful and always make sure you got all your bases covered, and you can learn those really hyper focused or hyper vigilant reactions possibly. But there's no real definitive answer to that. Those things might contribute, but I also know people who are, I mean, look, I didn't think the world was a dangerous place and I didn't come from a traumatic background. There wasn't pain that I had to heal or anything like that. I don't know. Like if you
yeah.
know me now, you would think, how the hell did you develop that disorder? Like I don't, when the building's on fire, I'm like, yeah, whatever, and we'll figure it out. But even I got trapped. So who the hell knows why it is? I don't know. You have any
I
theories on that?
I have a theory. There's a theory I use. It's not necessarily
Yeah,
original, and again, it's a theory. Take
sure.
this with a pinch of salt. But I do share this with my clients. I think we all have a stress jug,
Mhm.
stress cup, jug, whatever, and it's a metaphor for our ability to tolerate stress.
Hmm.
Now, some people have a large stress jug. That like my friend Callum that I mentioned before. He can tolerate a lot of stress and be fine. But I think due to genetics, some people have a smaller stress jug.
Mhm.
So I have quite a small stress jug, so I've got to be wary of what's in it.
Yeah.
And I think people who develop anxiety disorders do. And I think this is why most people who develop an anxiety disorder is in their young teenage or young adult,
Mhm.
because the stress of responsibilities of going into adulthood was the proverbial straw that broke camel's back.
Yeah.
I think, and what goes in that stress jug is everyday stuff, like career, relationships, family, finances, and your own subjective stuff, whether you've grown up, in a bad home or been through grief, trauma, or whatever.
Mm.
When that jug fills up and overflows, is when our own threat response, the when the amygdala misinterprets that stress as danger, and we enter a pattern. Some of us can enter a pattern because the final thing that keeps filling up that stress jug, and maybe we'll do like a separate episode on this, I don't know. But
Yeah.
the final thing that fills this stress jug is the fear itself, or the
Mm-hmm.
fear of misinterpretation of fear. So people are like, well, I've got boundaries with my family. Oh, but I've cut out gluten. I'm not drinking alcohol anymore. I'm getting more sleep. I'm going to the gym. Why am I still anxious? I was like, because yeah, okay, you've been emptying some of your jug out, but
Hmm.
the main thing that's filling it up is that fear itself. Hence why you keep going round and round in circles and having
Yeah.
panic and stuff like that. If that
And
makes sense.
I think it does make a lot of sense. I love your stress jug analogy. And I think when it becomes the fear of fear, you can never fully empty the jug. So,
Mm,
you bring it back to the title of the episode. Well, then how do I ever empty the jug? Well, you recognize the misinterpretation. You begin to interact differently with it on a cognitive and behavioral level, as
yes.
opposed to maybe an emotional or a physical level. And then you're not filling it as much. So you can empty it and then it can be empty sometimes.
Yeah,
Whereas,
I'd even go as far as say it can never be empty, but
yeah, probably not.
you can get rid of the stuff that you don't need in there. So
Right. And make room for just life stuff.
yeah, yeah, so for me, grief used to
Oh,
fill up
sure.
a lot of it.
Yeah.
And I'm never gonna fully empty grief out of the jug, but I did empty a lot of it out just by
Yeah.
talking about it and doing stuff. That's where therapy is really good. Or
Sure.
check or checking in with my body, not in the midst an urgency of panic or anxiety,
Mm.
but checking in with my body on days of perhaps bad anniversaries and stuff. That's when that advice is okay. So actually I can feel this quite a lot here and in my throat today, and
Yeah.
I'm carrying around grief. But in the midst of disordered anxiety with intrusive thoughts and they want to avoid stuff, no, I wouldn't check in and do those things. So yeah, we'll do another one on stress jug analogy. I quite like it. We
Oh, yeah.
could probably do our own stories as well, and actually blow by blow account.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think it matters in terms of how you get into that disordered state. It really matters, and it's applicable during your recovery, and it matters after. Like the
yeah.
stress jug is something we all have for every day we're alive. So
Someone asked me, Drew, the other day. They said, you know, do you still get anxiety? I was like, well, yeah. Or do you still get DPDR? Do you
yeah,
get derealized? I was like, yeah, I got one. I had an episode the other week.
yeah,
Just felt DPDR, but like the fear of DPDR was not in my jug anymore.
right,
And actually, I saw it as a positive. I was like, why am I getting derealization? I asked the question why. I was like, actually, you know why. You've
yeah,
probably been stressed recently and your jug's overflowing. So I'm like, actually, yeah, I've
yeah,
not slept properly for 3 days. I've not been eating the best. I probably had a few beers the other day. I've been so much on my to-do list. I've got deadlines.
yeah,
I had a disagreement with a family member. I've not been on holiday for ages, whatever. All these things just started building up and building up. Not been to the gym that week or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
But then that was it.
But it's so important to recognize, like you said, a lot of body things that really do matter. But if you were to add, now I'm afraid of the DPDR and I must find deeper meaning and find the danger and make it stop immediately, then you completely overflow the stress jug. So
Just
you can go to
completely
the gym all day if you want. You can eat all the fermented foods you want. It won't matter.
thrice fermented kimchi.
Yes, I've been in that discussion too. We'll talk about that one day too. We'll do a fermented foods episode. That sounds exciting. Tune in for that one, kids. You'll want to miss the kimchi episode. But
Yeah.
anyway. All right. Should we do a couple of do it anyways? Did it anyways
Oh,
to end
yeah.
this? Or
Have you got one? I've got
yeah. You
one.
know what? Interestingly, well, I think we kind of answered the question anyway. The question that I was going to throw in was, you know what? I'm not even gonna, because we've been talking about it for the last 10 minutes. It was about turning inward. Is that something that stays with you even after recovery?
Yeah, it's very quite similar to the one that was asked. Yeah, about checking in inwards
Yeah.
focus, outwards focus. We'll talk more about inwards focus and outwards focus in the future. I think because it's really
Sure.
important.
Yeah.
Particularly, we do an episode on neuroception, which I think is really cool. Also, it just sounds good, doesn't it?
Sounds better than
That's the
rice
name
fermented
of
kimchi. That's for sure.
that's the name of our first album, and our band name is Neuroception.
Get
Thrice
a new
cemented
thrice
kit.
fermented kimchi. That new album by Neuroception. I would
Yeah,
order Neuroception at a restaurant. I ain't touching the kimchi.
that would fill out a hipster bar very quickly.
Oh, it would.
Yeah, I have a good did it anyway. I've been following the Did It Anyway threads and proudly won recently. I had social fear and was afraid to meet some people due to some past emotional abuse that I'm dealing with. However, I decided to meet them head on anyway, and the fear over time naturally subsided. I love this trend that you guys have created, but I also felt that identifying that fear was itself very, very crucial before taking it on. Hashtag did it anyway.
Oh, that's really good. Love it.
I love that.
That gets applause. 100%.
Well, studio audience has been a bit quiet today, but
They
you've
have.
livened them up. So that's wonderful. Well done to you. That's
Yes.
outstanding.
That was well worth the applause. They're very
Yeah.
quiet. They're very well behaved. We only have thousands of people in the audience. You guys know that, right? We're actually recording at Madison Square Garden. There's 21,000 people watching us right now.
Chewing their kimchi very quietly.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
stinking here.
Yeah.
So mine did it anyway that I have, again, I won't name names unless somebody asks us to.
Yeah.
So for 5 years now, I've had a phobia that somehow getting on a spin bike would be the end of me. I used to do this 3 to 4 times a week and I used to love it. Well, I got on that bike last weekend and I rode for an hour for a total of 18 miles and I survived and I'm going back again for more. Yes.
Yeah.
That's a
Get
really
in.
good one. Gets me all
Get
pumped
on
up.
that spin bike.
Now I feel like I want to get on my really cheap spin bike that's in my basement. But
Oh,
excellent job. Yeah, I love it.
superb, superb. Nothing but applause for that. And yeah, getting back on it as well. Well done.
Yeah. All right. That's episode 8 of Disordered, sort of in the books. You guys want to
Yeah.
find all of these episodes, you can find us on our website at disordered.fm. Anything you want to add there, Josh?
No, that's great. And if you want to come say hello to us on social media, I'm Anxiety Josh. And Drew, your handle is?
The.anxious.truth on Instagram. But if you search for The Anxious Truth, you're going to find me all over the place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And until next time, you have a lovely rest of your week.
Yeah. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening. Hey, it's Drew. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Disordered. Josh and I both hope that you're finding it helpful in some way. For more information about Josh or me or the Disordered podcast, find us on the web at disordered.fm. That's disordered.fm. Pop on over and find links to our social media platforms. Join our mailing list so we can let you know when new podcast episodes are available. And we'll send you easy ways to ask us questions and share your wins so we can answer questions on the air and share your successes with the community. And if you're listening to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any platform that lets you rate or review, do us a favor and leave us a 5-star rating and maybe write a review if you're digging Disordered. It really helps us out and we appreciate that. Thanks again for coming by, and we'll see you in the next episode.